The King and the Emperor. There once was an emperor who had no children, and a king who also had no children. The emperor traveled across far and wide in search of some counsel or medicine to conceive children, and the king also set out in the same manner. They happened to meet in a particular inn, though they were not acquainted with each other. The emperor noted that the king had royal manners, so he asked him, and he informed him that he was a king. The king also recognized the same in the emperor, and the emperor informed him as well. They also revealed to each other that they were traveling for the aim of having children. They made a pact that if after returning to their homes their wives would conceive a son and a daughter in a manner that they could be married, then they would have them married. The emperor returned home and fathered a daughter, and the king returned and fathered a son, but they forgot about the pact. The emperor sent his daughter to study, and the king sent his son to study, and the two of them happened to be enrolled under the same teacher. They came to love each other very much, and they made a pact to get married. The son of the king took a ring and placed it on the finger of the emperor's daughter, and they married. Afterwards, the emperor sent after his daughter, and the king sent after his son, and each brought his child home. They spoke of matches for the emperor's daughter, but she did not want any match because of the aforementioned pact. The son of the king pined for her, and the emperor's daughter was constantly depressed. The emperor would lead her through his courtyard and palaces, and displayed her wealth to her. But still she was sad. The king's son longed so intensely for her that he became sick. When they asked him why he was sick, he would not answer. They said to his servant, "Perhaps you can investigate why." He answered them that he knew, for he was with him then where he had studied, and he explained to them the matter. Then the king remembered the agreement he had made with the emperor. He wrote to the emperor to prepare himself for the wedding, for they had already agreed to it. The emperor did not want it anymore, but he did not dare refuse. He asked the king to send his son to him to see if he had the quality of rulership, and if so, he would give his daughter to him. The king sent his son to him. The emperor seated him in a room, giving him papers of government matters to see if he could rule the country. The king's son longed deeply to see the emperor's daughter, but they did not allow him. One time he went by a mirror and saw her, and he fainted. She went over to him, woke him, and revealed that she did not want any other match because of the pact between them. He asked her, "What will we do, seeing that your father does not want the match?" She answered, "Even so." Afterwards, they came upon the idea that they would sail out to sea. They hired a ship and sailed. They continued to sail and eventually wanted to come to shore. They reached the shore, where there was a forest, and they entered it. The emperor's daughter took off the ring and gave it to him, and she went to sleep there. When the king's son saw her steering, he laid the ring next to her. Afterwards, they rose and returned to the ship. Meanwhile, the emperor's daughter remembered that they had forgotten the ring there, so she sent him back for it. He went back, but could not find the place. He went to another place, and still could not find the ring. He went from place to place, looking for it, until he became lost, and could not find his way back. She went to look for him, and she also lost her way. As he continued on, he became more and more lost. After a time, he saw a path, and followed it to a settlement. He did not have anything to do there, so he became a servant. She too became increasingly lost, and decided to go and sit by the sea. She went to the shore, and there were fruit trees there. She sat there, and in the day she would walk by the sea, hoping to find ships passing by. She lived off of the fruits, and at night she climbed up into the trees to be protected from the wild animals. Meanwhile, that there was a very powerful and impressive businessman who had dealings all over the world. He had an only son, and the businessman was elderly. One time, the son said to his father, "Seeing that you are old and I am young, and your ministers are not looking out for me at all, when you will pass away, I will be left empty-handed, without knowing what to do. Why don't you give me a ship with merchandise, and I'll set to sea to become expert in business?" His father gave him a ship with merchandise, and he went to various countries, sold his goods, bought others in their place, and was successful. While he was at sea, he saw those trees wherein was the emperor's daughter, and thought it was a settlement. He wanted to go there, but as he drew closer, he saw that it was only trees, so he wanted to turn back. Just then, he happened to gaze on one tree, and within it was the form of a person. He thought he might be misperceiving, so he told the other people who were with him, and they looked and also saw the form of a person in the tree. They decided to approach the place and sent out one man in a small boat. They kept they kept watch on him to direct him, so that he would not lose his way, so that he would keep headed toward the tree. He arrived there and saw that there was a person sitting in the tree, and he told them. The trader's son went himself and saw that she was sitting there, the emperor's daughter. And he told her to come down. She answered that she would not descend unless he promised her that he would not touch her until they returned to his house and he married her lawfully. He promised her, and she boarded the ship with him. He saw that she knew how to play instruments, and she also spoke several languages, and he rejoiced in his find. Afterwards, as they began to near his house, she said to him that it would be proper for him to go to the house and inform his father and relatives and all his friends, so that all of them would come out to welcome her. And after that she would reveal who she was, for even before she had demanded that he not ask her name until after the wedding. Only then he would know who she was. He agreed to this. She added, "It would also be fitting, seeing that you are bringing such an important woman with you, that you should honor all the sailors in the ship with fine wine, so that they should know that their captain is marrying such a woman." He agreed. He took good wine that he had in the ship, gave it to them, and they became very drunk. Meanwhile, as he went to his house to tell his father and relatives, the sailors left the ship and collapsed in a drunken stupor. While the family was preparing to go out and receive her, she went and released the ship from its moorings, spread the sails, and sailed away. The family went down to the ship and found nothing there. The old businessman, the trader's father, was very angry with him. The son exclaimed excitedly, "Believe me, I brought a ship full of merchandise, but they did not see a thing." He said, "Go and ask the sailors." They went to ask them, and found them lying drunk. When they awoke, they were asked, but they did not know at all what had happened to them. They only knew that they had brought a ship with merchandise, and did not know where it was. The father was enraged at his son, and banished him from the house, warning him not to come within his presence. And so he wandered aimlessly, and the emperor's daughter sailed on the sea. Meanwhile, that there was a certain king who had built a palace on the sea, for it pleased him to build palaces on the sea, because of the sea air, and ship would pass there. The emperor's daughter was sailing the sea, and she came close to his king's palace. The king gazed and saw a ship without anyone directing it, with no one on it. He thought he was mistaken, so he asked his people to look, and they also saw likewise. She drew closer to the palace, but then thought to herself, "What do I need with this palace?" So she started to turn back. But the king sent to bring her back, and he brought her into his palace. This king had no wife, for he could not choose one. The ones he desired did not want him, and vice versa. When the emperor's daughter came, she asked him to swear that he would not touch her until he married her lawfully. So he swore. She said that it was fitting that he not open the ship's hold, nor tamper with it. Rather, it should stay in its place on the sea until the marriage. Then everyone would see it all, the abundance of merchandise that she had brought. Then people would not say he had taken a woman from off the street. He promised her accordingly. The king wrote to all the nations to come to his wedding, and he built a palace for her. She demanded that they bring her 11 of the minister's daughters to be with her. Thus the king commanded, and they sent her 11 daughters of very high-ranking ministers. They built a palace specially for each one, and she also had her own palace. They would gather together with her and would play on instruments and pass the time with her. One time she asked them to come with her onto the ship, and they went with her and entertained themselves there. Then she said she would honor them with fine wine that she had, and she gave them from the wine on the ship. And they became drunk and fell into a stupor. Meanwhile, she went and released the ship and spread out the sails and made off with the ship. Now the king and his people looked and noticed that the ship was not there, and were shocked. The king said, "Beware not to tell her all at once, for she will be very distressed at the loss of such a valuable ship as that one. For the king did not know that she herself had escaped with the ship, and assumed that she was still in her room. She also might think that the king gave the ship to someone, simply sent one of the minister's daughters to tell her with wisdom. They went to one room and did not find anyone, and then to another, and so to all the 11 rooms, and found no one. They agreed to send an elderly mistress in the night to tell her. They went to her room and found no one there. They were very shocked. Meanwhile, the fathers of the missing women, who were accustomed to receiving letters from their daughters, now noticed that they were not receiving any letters. So they went to see for themselves. Upon not finding their daughters, they were enraged. They considered banishing the king and sending him to the prison for those deserving the death penalty. They were the ministers of the nation, having the power to mete out punishments such as this. However, they thought to themselves, "What is the king's sin that he should be imprisoned? He had no control over the matter." So they agreed to dethrone and banish him. They did, and he went on his way. As the emperor's daughter, she escaped with the 11 ministers' daughters and sailed away in the ship. When the daughters woke up, they resumed their play, for they did not realize that the ship had left shore. Presently, they said to her, "Let's return." She said to them, "Let's stay a while longer." After this, a fierce storm developed, and they said, "We must return home." Then she revealed to them that the ship had already left the shore. They asked her why she had done this, and she explained that she feared the ship would be broken apart by the storm wind. Therefore, she had no choice but to unfurl and spread the sails. So they sailed on the sea, and they played their instruments. Then they passed by a palace, and the daughters said to her, "Let's approach it." She did not want to, because she regretted having come near the first palace, the one belonging to the king who wanted to marry her. After this, they saw an island and approached it. There were 12 thieves there who wanted to murder them. The emperor's daughter asked, "Who is the chief among you?" And they introduced her to him. Then she asked him, "What is your trade?" And he answered that they were thieves. She said, "We are also thieves. However, whereas you use brute force, we use wisdom. We are learned in languages and in playing instruments. What would you benefit by murdering us? Better marry us, and then you can also acquire all our wealth." She showed him the riches that were in their ship, and their words won them over. The thieves also showed them all their wealth and led them through their whole camp. They agreed that they would not marry all at once, rather one pair after another. Further, that each of the thieves should choose a bride benefiting him, the most honored according to his high standing, and so on. Then she announced that she wanted to honor them with a fine and wondrous wine that she had in the ship. She told them that she had intended never to use it, guarding it instead for the day when she would meet her intended match. Then she served them the wine in 12 goblets, and asked each of the thieves to drink from one. They drank, became intoxicated and collapsed. She said to her co- to her companions, "Go now, each one of you, and slaughter her husband." And they did. Then they found incredible wealth beyond that of any king. They agreed not to take any brass or silver, only gold and precious stones. They threw from their ship possessions which were not so valuable, and loaded it with the treasure, the gold and stones they had found. They agreed to cease dressing as women, so they sewed for themselves men's clothing and sailed away in the ship. Now there was an elderly king who had an only son. He married him off and bequeathed the kingdom to him. The king's son said that he and his wife should take a cruise at sea, so that she should be accustomed to the sea air, in case, God forbid, they might at some point need to escape on the sea. He went with his wife and his ministers, and they were very jubilant and in a spirit of festivity. At one point, they decided they should strip off all their clothes, and so they did. They left on nothing except their undergarments, and they began to dare to climb up onto the prow, the king's son among them. Now the emperor's daughter came along in her ship and saw this other ship, the ship with the king's son and his company. And at first she was afraid to draw near it. After coming a bit closer, she saw that they were merrymaking, and realized that they were not thieves, so they drew near. Then she said to her friends, "I can bring that bald head toppling into the sea, that is, the king's son, who was climbing the prow, for he was in fact bald." Her friends replied, "But how? We are so far away from them." She explained to them that there is a lens with the power to burn, and she would use one to topple him. She added that she would not topple him until he climbed to the very tip of the prow. If he fell from the middle of it, he would fall into the ship, but if he climbed to the tip, he would fall into the sea. She waited until he climbed all the way to the tip, and then she took the lens and held it up to the sun and directed its ray squarely at his head until his brain was burned and he fell into the sea. When the friends of the king's son saw that he had fallen, it threw them into a upheaval. For how could they return home? The king would die from sorrow. They decided to draw near to the ship they saw nearby, the ship of the emperor's daughter. Perhaps they would find a doctor on board who could give them advice. They came next to the ship and told them, the emperor's daughter and her friends, not to be afraid. They would not do them any harm. Then they asked, "Perhaps there is a doctor among you who could advise us?" They recounted the whole story of how the king's son had fallen into the sea. The emperor's daughter answered that they should retrieve his body from the sea. They went and found his body and retrieved it. Then she took his pulse and said that his brain had been burnt. They cut open his head and saw that it was just as she had said, and they were astonished. They asked her to come home with them and to be the king's doctor, and said she would be very important and esteemed, but she did not want to go. She added that she was not really a doctor, but just happened to know these things. The ministers of the king did not want to return home, so the two ships sailed together. They were very strongly in favor of their queen marrying the doctor, because of the impressive wisdom they saw in him, for they thought that the emperor's daughter and their friends were men, because they were dressed as men. Thus they wanted their queen, the wife of the king who had died, to marry the doctor, who was really the emperor's daughter, and so that he should become their king. They would murder their original king, the elderly king mentioned earlier. They all wanted this very much, yet they felt they could not speak to the queen about marrying the doctor. She herself also wanted very much to marry the doctor, but she feared from the country's people, lest they not be willing to accept him as king. So they decided to throw parties, so that during a party at an opportune moment they could talk about this. They held a party for each on a different day. When the day arrived for the doctor's, the emperor's daughter's, party, she gave them to drink from her aforementioned wine, and they became drunk. At the opportune moment, the minister said, "How fine it would be for the queen to marry the doctor." "It would be very fine," the doctor replied, "but if they would only say it without being drunk." Also the queen responded, saying, "How fine it would be for her to marry the doctor, but only if the nation would agree to it." The doctor, that is the emperor's daughter, responded again as before, saying, "It would be very fine if only they would say it without being drunk." When they awoke from their stupor, the ministers remembered what they had said and were embarrassed before the queen on account of it. However, she herself had said the same. She was also embarrassed before them, but on the other hand, they had also said it. They started to talk about it and came to agree on it. The queen was thus married to the doctor, the emperor's daughter, who they believed to be a doctor, and they returned to their country. When the people of the country saw them coming, they were very joyful, for it had been a long time that the king's son had been gone, and they had not known where he was. The elderly king had already passed away before their return. They noticed that the king's son, who should now be their king, was missing. So they asked, where is our king?" They explained to them the whole story, how he had already died, and that they had already accepted upon themselves this new king, who had come with them. The people were very joyous that a new king had arrived. Now the king, the emperor's daughter, who had now become a king, commanded to declare in every state that everyone in every place, be he a foreigner, a guest, a fugitive, or one banished, should come to the king's wedding without exception, and that all would receive great gifts. The king commanded that they should dig wells surrounding the whole city, so that when one would went to drink, he would not have to go far, but would find a well right beside him. The king also commanded to paint a portrait of himself by every well, and to station guards by each one, to watch for someone who would come and stare an unusually long time at the portrait, and make a disturbed face. That is, whose expression would change as one seeing something and being amazed and disturbed by it. Such a one should be arrested, and so they did. The three aforementioned characters came. The son of the first king, who was the true husband of the emperor's daughter, the son of the businessman, whose father had banished him because of the emperor's daughter, who escaped with the ship loaded with merchandise, and the king, who was dethroned also by her doing, for she escaped from him with the 11 ministers' daughters. Each one of them recognized her portrait, gazed at it, remembered, and was pained. They were all arrested. At the wedding, the king, the emperor's daughter, commanded that the prisoners come before her. So they brought the three, and she recognized them, but they did not recognize her, for she was dressed as a man. The emperor's daughter spoke up and said, "You, king," that is, the king who was dethroned as described, "they dethroned you on account of the 11 daughters that were lost. Here are your ministers' daughters. Go back to your country and your kingdom." The 11 ministers' daughters were here with her. Then she turned to address the son of the businessman. "You businessman, your father banished you on account of the ship with all the merchandise that you lost. Here is your ship with all the merchandise. As for all the time lost, now you have riches in the ship, many times the original value. For the ship itself, with all the merchandise of the businessman's son, was still with her in perfect condition, and in addition, it now held all the treasures she had taken from the thieves, a very tremendous wealth, overflowing in abundance. And as for you, son of the king, that is, her true husband, come and let us go home." And they returned to their home. Blessed is the Lord forever. Amen and amen.